Hello and welcome back to Mr. Mulhern Music, and today we are going to look at the composer of that piece I just had a go at playing, Miles Davis. That piece I just played was called Four, and it's probably one of my favourite pieces he's composed. Now let's have a look at Miles Davis. Here he is. He was an American trumpeter, band leader and composer. He was born on the 26th of May 1926 in Illinois in America. He is considered one of the most influential, most important figures in the history of jazz and 20th century music. So he's really important, really important. And his style of music changed all the time. Yes, he played jazz, but it changed a lot. Now, he really liked music from an early age, especially gospel music, big band and blues. In 1935, Miles Davis received his first trumpet as a gift. Now, by the time he was 13, he got pretty good and had got a new trumpet and started playing in bands. Now, by age 15, he joined a marching band and realised that actually he could play, but he couldn't read music or anything like that. So had to learn to be in this marching band. So let's have a look at his career and some of the different styles of music that actually he composed and played through his years. So let's start in the early 1940s. He started off by playing bebop at that point. That's a really fast type of jazz, really hard to dance to because of the rhythms. Now by the late 40s he had slowed down, he was playing smooth jazz, so it's quite a lot more relaxed. 1950s, early 1950s, back to the bebop style, playing more of a harder style of bebop. By 1950s, a bit of late 1950s, modal jazz, which sometimes can sound quite unusual. In the 1960s, he was working in quartets and quintets, so with 4 and 5 musicians, playing lots of jazz standards. In the late 60s and early 70s, complete change. He went away from traditional jazz, worked on fusion, which is putting two genres together, and focused on electric music, a completely different sound to what he had been making before. In the late 1970s, he took a break from making music, and it's rumoured to say that he didn't actually play his trumpet for 3 years until he started making music again in the 1980s and into the very beginning of the 1990s. So today we're going to compare 3 very different performances from Miles Davis. So the first piece I want us to have a look at is called So What. It's kind of the name that Miles Davis gives to his songs, doesn't really mean very much. And it's quite simple in terms of actually what's written, and it's mainly about improvising. So What was the first track on his 1959 album, Kind of Blue. And it kind of focuses around 2 chords for the main section. They sound like this. And that kind of repeats round for the main section. There's a different section that you hear a bit later where it changes key, but it keeps that same kind of thing. And by leaving that much open space, loads of room to improvise, which is fantastic because that's one thing he likes to do. And actually his whole band pretty much gets a chance to improvise. So you start with that main theme, the da-da, which you hear played round. And then Miles Davis on his trumpet takes a solo. And then there's a saxophone solo, then a piano solo, then another Miles Davis trumpet solo, and finally, double bass solo. So look out for which instruments get to make a solo, because that's one of your questions. The next piece, completely different. It's Summertime, a really well-known jazz standard. It was composed in 1934 by George Gershwin for his opera Porgy and Bess. Lyrics were composed a bit later, and the song soon became very popular and one of the most recorded jazz standards. It's been described as, without a doubt, one of the finest songs that the composer ever wrote. Miles Davis plays this song in 1991 with the Quincy Jones Orchestra, and you can hear he's changing the tune slightly by adding a few notes and at times taking it away. So normally you would hear. Now when he plays that first, he doesn't play the last note. So you don't get the last note of the tune. And you can hear he does that all the way through, and he'll make some bits shorter and some bits longer. So he changes it completely. So instead of you'll hear the tune change to no last note on the end. So he does that all the way through, and it's really interesting to see. It's very different to the solo he did before in the So What piece, because it's much more simple and he kind of sticks to the tune with only little bits. And then he moves aside to let the saxophone player do a solo in that as well. Now the third piece I want you to compare these two to is completely different. It's called Burn. It was performed on the 15th of June 1986 at a stadium, the Giants Stadium in New Jersey. It was a charity concert to raise awareness of the charity, and had various artists performing such as Joni Mitchell, Little Steven, Joan Armatrading, Yoko Ono and Miles Davis. Miles and his band played for just under half an hour, and they kind of performed songs from his most recent album and one that was about to come out. So they played One Phone Call, Street Scenes, New Blues, 2-2, Splash, and finally Burn. And the one thing you'll notice about this is it's much more free and improvised, but it's fusion. It's kind of funk rock put together. So you'll hear completely different sound to the other two pieces, so you should see a big contrast. You'll notice not only does the sound change, the instruments change, and the way they're played is changed as well. So a huge difference. So they're your three pieces. They're completely different instrumentation, completely different tempo, dynamics. You need to spot which instruments play the solos, so who gets a chance to stand out. And when you finish comparing, I've got one extra thing you might like to do. And I've put an extra video at the bottom of the playlist. It's called Call It Anything. It is a 35-minute improvisation from the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970. With Miles Davis on the trumpet, Gary Bartz on soprano and alto saxophone, Keith Jarrett, who we're going to look at next time, on electric piano, Chick Corea, who's on also on electric piano, Dave Holland on bass guitar, Jack DeJohnette on drums, and Arto Mura on percussion. It's a fantastic improvisation. It's based around an album that they just released, but it's pretty much free all the way through to improvise through. So it shows a completely different style again. So you've got those three pieces to compare, and then an optional piece you can listen to at the end, which is absolutely fantastic. So that's loads for you to be getting on with. Enjoy listening to these pieces by Miles Davis.